Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Building a Truly Engaged Board of Directors with our guest faculty, Marla Cornelius and Vernetta Walker. Welcome to both of you. My name is Jean Bell. I direct the Advancing Practice program here at the Nonprofit Quarterly. Perhaps some of you have been to sessions before. In the midst of COVID, we've been mixing in Advancing Practice sessions and COVID response sessions. So this is an Advancing Practice session, and it's part of our Leading Edge membership program, and we welcome you to it. If you can advance to the next slide, please. Before I get into logistics, I want to acknowledge that we're recording this in the immediate aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and there's a lot of feelings and intensity in our communities and in our organizations, and some of us are going to work and doing the work that we do, and our hearts are heavy and we're angry. We also honor not only him and his life and his family, but all of the activists and organizations that got us to the place where those policemen have already been fired, and there's a lot of organization and network that's allowing activism to bloom in its immediate aftermath. So we recognize all of you who are in that fight, and all of us are self-reflective today about what this means for our organizations and our leadership. And really, I think if one has the mental and emotional space to talk about nonprofit leadership, talking about governance and the way we volunteer to lead in organizations can make some sense. I have found a way for it to make sense for me today, and I hope you do too. And I think it is really important. And I think it's one of the many venues in the social sector that we have for engagement and for helping to craft the responses and the policies and the programs of organizations. So I don't want to speak for the two of you, but that's the spirit with which I'm coming into this today as the moderator, that we have a lot of work to do, and boards are part of getting that work done. So the logistics for today are, as they often are for Advancing Practice, we're recording this session. That means you're going to get the slides and the recording within a few business days. We have a hashtag for your use on social media, which is NPQ Boards. We're using the Q&A box, not the chat, but the Q&A for you to enter in your comments and questions. They don't only have to be questions, they can be comments, and I'll be moderating that, reading what you put in there over the course of this discussion and peppering our very experienced faculty with your questions and comments. There's also a very short evaluation that's really instrumental for us in developing the program that pops up immediately following. I already mentioned that this is a leading edge membership program, and that's a program for our active users so that you can just subscribe once a year and get the magazine and the online content and all of these webinars. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, please do. I think it's a good engagement strategy. And then you see at the bottom there our hashtag again and our various Twitter handles if you want to engage with us. So those are our logistics, and I'd like to thank again Marla and Vernetta for being here. Some of you recognize them, if not from your own interaction with their work, from their terrific two-part series last year, Being a Board Chair, which is still available in your Leading Edge membership library. But next slide, please. Thank you for being here, and Marla, I'll turn it to you to just introduce yourself, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, and thank you so much, Jean, for that introduction. I really appreciate it, or the framing for today's conversation. Yes, I'm Marla Cornelius. Hello, everybody. It's really nice to be here with Vernetta and Jean and Nonprofit Quarterly family. I'm a consultant, and I work with nonprofit staff leaders and board leaders in the areas of organizational development, leadership development, and board governance, which is one of my really favorite topics to talk about and an area to work within. And I do work nationally, and I'm based in Oakland, California.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here, Marla. And Vernetta, tell us a little bit about your work.
Happy to, and hello, everyone. First and foremost, Vernetta Walker and Associates Consulting. So my focus is nonprofit governance, has been for over 2 decades. And under my governance umbrella, I also do quite a bit of work focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I work nationally and globally, I should say, when it comes to nonprofit governance. Been on my own for 2 years, and formerly was Chief Governance Officer for BoardSource, and still serve as a BoardSource Senior Governance Consultant and Advisor. Happy to see everyone.
Thank you so much for being here. And I know we might reference some board source content. They're, the preeminent sort of capacity building organization around governance. And so it's great to have you and your connection to their research. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do is kind of give people a sense of how the conversation is going to go, what Marla and Vernetta are going to go, where they're going to be going deep, so that you can kind of plan your own participation and where you might want to ask questions. So here's the arc. First, we're going to, before we just jump right into how do we get an engaged board, we're going to spend a little time, which was fun for the three of us to do, to say, well, what do we even mean by that? What is board engagement, and what does it look like across different parts of the sector? And then we are going to spend the bulk of our time in, well, what are some of the levers for change? And the ones that Marla and Vernetta are going to go deep on are the role of key leaders in fostering board engagement, the role of the recruitment and orientation process, the role of meeting content and design in fostering engagement, how we foster engagement between meetings, right? And how we use things like board assessment and the kinds of action that we might need to take to get our board back in gear. And time permitting, we'll certainly take additional questions that you might have and hear some more of their more sort of informal insights about the work they've done with boards. So that's kind of how we're going to approach this. So we're going to start, part one of the three parts is what is board engagement? And the way we're thinking about this is that this is a very dynamic concept. We often think of governance as a practice, best practice. What's best practice? How many board members should I have? How often should we meet? There's a lot of shoulds. And I think a lot of times, especially newer executives or senior staff or newer board members are thinking there's some one thing, right? There's one fit. And in talking to the two of you, we were able just in a short time to surface all of these different dimensions that actually affect how we might characterize ideal board engagement at a given moment for a given organization. And those are in the gray circles around that engagement. So organization type, I mean, obviously, if you're a membership organization, if you're a national organization with chapters, if you're a local grassroots organization, you're gonna have different takes on engagement. It's not one size fits all. The life cycle, if you're a young organization, you'll probably be very hands-on with a founding board versus a very mature organization with term limits and boundaries set in very formal ways between board and staff, right? Your revenue model, which NPQ talks about a lot. Do you need a fundraising board? Or no, you're actually a almost entirely government-funded organization. It's not about fundraising at all. It's about engagement and advocacy and strategy. So, and on and on. Are you in an executive leadership transition or about to go through one? What kinds of needs for volunteerism do you have from your board members as individuals? All of these things are going to affect, we realized, what we even mean by board engagement. So before we get into the shoulds of this webinar, we want you to assess those things and think about what's really appropriate. But Vernetta, let me let you take it from here and kind of expand on this.
Sure, happy to. So definitely, I love this diagram, this visual, to see the different considerations when it comes to board engagement. And I can say in my work, there are a couple of things that really loom large in terms of how a board engages and how hands-on they are. Founding boards or startup organizations, you're going to have deep, deep engagement. Doesn't mean that once an organization is mature that we don't want our boards engaged. It's just a different level and different type of engagement. Also, whether or not the organization has staff to really support the board and their engagement. Now, beyond that, there are a couple of considerations. But first, I wanted to start with the conversation that we had about, is there any data when it comes to board engagement? So I went back and looked at Board Source's 2017 Leading with Intent report, and there was a finding that a deep understanding of programs is linked to stronger engagement in several key areas: strategic thinking and planning, overall commitment, fundraising, and community outreach. So one of the things that Leading with Intent talks about is the need to invest in an ongoing way in terms of educating the board about programs and the operations. Our board members need to be well versed in what an organization is doing so that they can also be ambassadors for the organization. But having a good grasp on how on an organization's impact as well as its programs can really lead to a deeper commitment and engagement. additionally, there's a circle that is not up there that I think we're all experiencing today in these challenging times. And I would add a circle for whether you call it crisis or unforeseen circumstances. And I mean those big things that just blows everything out of the water. We weren't predicting a pandemic. And yet, during this period in time, I'm seeing boards really rise to the occasion, lean into the circumstances, and demonstrate leadership that I'm sure some of these CEOs, they were wondering, well, where has this been over the last year or the last couple of years? But in a very well received way. So I hate to think that it's going to stop with the crisis, and I don't think it will, because one of the things I'm noticing for sure is that those boards that have become much more engaged, they're really appreciating their role in leading the organization and being very forward looking and figuring out how to emerge even stronger than when we went into the pandemic. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it is a good thing. And unfortunately, I think adding it permanently may be a really good idea, because the pace or the frequency of crises, we sense, don't we, that they may be coming more frequently. So that's a good segue in terms of that sense of purpose you just described, Vernetta, that you hope boards retain. To this next slide, please. I'm going to hand it to you, Marla, to talk a little bit more about what engagement feels like. What are we looking for? Signs of engagement.
Yeah, and I love that we're talking about not just what does it look like, but how does it feel? And we had a really good conversation getting ready for today, where, speaking for myself personally, I really got in touch again with, as a board member myself, what does it feel like when I'm engaged? And I think this is a part of the picture that we often don't talk about, and I'd like us to get back in touch with it. And so these things that we came up with, what does it feel like when, so starting with the board members, when we have a collective sense of purpose? And it's a team sense, right? And a board is a team, and there's a lot of intentionality that goes with that. So when we are on teams, we talk about our purpose and we talk about what we're here to do collectively, right? And if we don't explicitly say that, we may not be on the same page, but there's definitely a feeling that comes with that, yeah, we're all in this together and we're working towards the same thing. Also, what does it feel like when we feel as though our time is well spent, that I am looking forward to going to board meetings or to work on something that's a board activity or what have you on behalf of the organization, and I know it's going to pay off. That's something that that spirit that we are getting ready for it, and then when we're there, we're rewarded by that, and that what I am bringing to the organization, my contributions are valued and recognized, that I feel as though I'm appreciated, and the work that I'm doing is appreciated. And it's not just appreciated because perhaps people appreciate me as a person. That's important, sure, but that what I'm bringing is specifically needed, and that it is contributing to something that the organization needs. It's a piece of the puzzle. Other people are also contributing, right? That is without it might be a missing piece, and that we can make good decisions together. I mean, that is absolutely a feeling, and I'm sure all of us can tap into that, those times when you felt like, yeah, that was really good, we really got through something, and maybe we grappled with it, maybe it was hard, and maybe we didn't always just agree on everything, but we came to the right decision on behalf of this organization. And, one of the things I was joking with Jean and Vernetta about as we're getting ready for this is, sometimes I want to almost ask, like a polling question almost for folks. When you're getting ready to go to a board meeting, or you're looking at your calendar, you've got a board meeting coming up, let's say tomorrow night or, next week or what have you, what is the feeling you have? Are you like, yeah, I'm looking forward to this? Or are you thinking, ugh, I don't want to, And to me, that's a real indicator and what's going on there, to tap into that. So I want us as board members to really take responsibility for and checking in with ourselves in terms of how do we feel when we're engaged, and why. And we can ask each other about those things as well. And then really briefly, let's also talk a bit for or just a moment here about the staff. And because, as the phrase says at the bottom, when engagement is right, board and staff alike feel that the organization is stronger for their partnership. And just like teamwork, partnership requires intentionality. It doesn't just happen. You can't just expect it to be strong. A partnership really needs intentionality and care and feeding, right? And so what staff members feel when the board is engaged is that they care about the organization. They really get and understand and respect their role and how it intersects with staff, what those boundaries are, that staff can really count on us to show up to meetings and events. And that's a big deal. And I hear too often how staff feel really disappointed, let down, and frankly disrespected sometimes when board members don't follow through. And that's a real problem that we need to be very mindful of. It's not just a, oh, I didn't quite get to it issue. You know, it makes a difference, and it can degrade not just morale in the partnership, but it can really degrade, I think, the work that we're trying to do together. And can the staff really trust us to do the work that we're going to do and to make good decisions on behalf of this organization? So I love this slide, and I'll stop here because I feel like these things that we were able to underscore and surface for ourselves, these are things we can ask each other about. And these can almost be, you know, the starters of conversations to say, well, are we engaged? What does it even look like? And of course, what does it feel like?
Yeah, thank you. Sure, Vernetta, build on that.
I thought I would take the challenge and answer your poll question. So when I see on my calendar that I have a board meeting coming up, I feel excited. But I'm going to add a caveat to that because I think there may be board members who are experiencing this right now with so much going on. And I do have a board meeting coming up. I'm excited, but also I will admit honestly that sometimes I feel a little overwhelmed. There's so much going on, and everyone is at home and people, taken care of. And it's like, wow, it's a lot. But this is something else that I think speaks to engagement, even through everything. And even when I was traveling all the time for the consulting and board, other people's board meetings, one of the things that I let the staff know at the organization where I serve on the board, I said, because I travel a lot, if I'm not responding to you immediately or in a way that you need, text me and I will get right back to you. So I think being transparent, sharing when you're feeling challenged, but also willing and living into your commitments is important. So that communications piece is important. So maybe if you do skip a beat, there won't be assumptions that, oh, she has just, fallen off the rails. And if you need to reach out or communicate differently, letting them know. But being engaged means that you're really honoring your commitment to be there for those who count on you. The team, that's your board, the team, that's the staff, the organization, and the mission.
That's super helpful. Yeah, and I love your point. We talked about board engagement as a set of activities being dynamic. Of course, people's engagement is going to be dynamic over their board tenure. Something's going on in their life, or they're worried about COVID, or they're out protesting the police, or whatever it is. I didn't get back to you, right? That doesn't mean I'm out. But recognizing, and we're going to talk about this as we go along, it is hard to manage a board. It's a body, but it's all these individuals in different points of their life and with different reasons for being there and all of that. That's what makes it challenging. So let's continue. Next slide. So that little discussion was meant to, I think, underscore that there isn't one definition of board engagement, that it is dependent on a whole set of organizational factors, what will feel like right engagement. And then secondly, that how it feels is really good evidence of if it's working. How it feels as individual board members, how it feels as the ED, how it feels as the staff. Those are good insights and good places to start to see if there's room to improve. So now let's shift to, okay, so we want to feel that way. We want to feel like we're making a contribution that's recognized. We want to feel like our board can make good decisions. We want to feel like we can count on our board. How do we get there? And we've looked at a couple of different levers here, and there are probably more, but we thought these were, I think you two thought they were, if you could really pay attention in each of these spaces in a consistent way, and I'm going to keep saying that, in a consistent way, it could really pay off, right? So let's start with the role of the executive director. We're going to start with leadership because this stuff doesn't happen without people modeling and encouraging it. So Marla, can I have you kick off with how should the executive director think about their role in fostering board engagement?
Yeah, and I love Vernetta. I'm going to pick up where you left off a bit around, it's very relational, right? Engagement is relational. The work of any organization is relational inherently in so many different ways. And that means that we need to get to know the people. We need to understand our roles. We need to understand other people's roles. And there is a huge part of board engagement that has a lot to do with the role of the executive director. And, I love these questions because I think executive directors who are on the webinar right now would love for you to think about right now, how engaged do you feel your board is? And that's tricky, right? Because there are individuals and then there's the whole. And we have to be careful because when we talk about the board, to me, that signals the whole group. But there's different engagement within that group of people. When we talk about individual board members, well, again, there's going to be a lot of variation in between there. So do you really want an engaged board of directors? I mean, I would hope the answer would be yes. And also, what does that even mean to you? And what do you hope for? What are you looking for? And I saw Jean kind of go, well, because I've heard, and maybe this is what you're thinking about too, I've heard EDs say things like, well, actually, a less engaged board can be super helpful because I can get stuff done, I can move things through, I don't get bogged down, and things like that. But I think that once we define engagement for us, as we just talked about earlier, each organization really does need to think about what does it look like for them, given their life cycle and all the other dynamics we spoke of. But once we do that and really define what it looks like for us, I think the promise of this and the hope would be that executive directors would indeed say, of course I want an engaged board. And for me and this organization, this is what it looks like. So spend some time thinking about that question. And then, of course, how much time as an executive director are you willing to put into the board? Are you interested in getting to know them? As a board member, my engagement is, as we talked about before, is very contingent upon how I'm able to engage, how I'm able to contribute, the relationships I have, how I'm able to bring forth the things I have to offer to the organization. So how well am I understood? Do people know what I'm bringing? Do they understand my talents and interests and strengths, weaknesses, and all of that? And if I'm not known and those things are not evident, how can you engage with me well? How can you ask things of me and give me feedback and make requests? And as Vernetta said, if I'm not responsive, do you know who I even am to say, hey, what's up with Marla? Is she okay? Let's reach out to her. Or yeah, she's just really busy right now. All of those little things matter and they're relational. What strengths do I bring to this particular aspect of my leadership? Executive directors, what are your strengths when it comes to engaging board members? Are you very relational? Well, of course, everybody's relational. How are you relational, though? What does that look like for you? Are you somebody who has high connectivity? Like you love to connect people to things? Are you somebody that's a great time manager or is terrific in terms of project management or not so much, right? So just bringing your own self-awareness, your own talents and strengths as an executive director, as a person, to the question of board engagement, I think is really interesting. And then, of course, the flip side of that, as an ED, what weaknesses or bad habits do you have? We all have them. We all have them. Know thyself. The ones that you have, how are they showing up in board engagement? Where are they getting in the way potentially? So the converse of what I just said. Do you struggle with time management? Do you struggle with being organized? Is that getting in the way? Is that ruffling the feathers of board members? And so their engagement is getting impacted negatively. Are you conflict avoidant? On the other side, are you too conflict seeking sometimes, where you kind of come in hot? And sometimes that's not always the best way to come in. So all of those kinds of things that are human, you as humans, how are you showing up to board engagement and just being really intentional or thoughtful about that and thinking about that, and then how to be a little bit more intentional and think about those practices.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me how little people prepare you for this aspect of being an executive director. It's kind of hard to prepare for. You know, I mean, it's hard to do the experiential learning until you've the best way to prepare for it is to be a board member, of course, so that by the time you're an executive director, you understand at least what it feels like to come into that space as a volunteer leader and try to build relationships and trust. There's so many dynamics going on. And when an executive director can do that work thoughtfully, it just pays off in so many ways. And when they can't, you inevitably see it in the quality and performance of the board. Next slide, please. Vernetta, the board, oh, sorry. You want to talk about the ED before we get to the board chair?
I do. And I'm sorry, but Marla, you're making me think of so many things. And actually, I want to throw this question out to both of you. And I don't know why I didn't think of it before as much as we have talked. I'm wondering, what's your opinion about the role of a board liaison? And I'm asking that question because I've seen that role used and implemented in different ways. And I'm gonna give you two examples, and they're extremes. And one example, there was an ED that really felt that they did not have time for the board. And it was also perceived as this ED really didn't want to be bothered with the board. So created role, board liaison, having all those touch points and contacts and keeping all the communications going. And another instance, in the way I see it more traditionally utilized, the role that is someone who is coordinating, because depending on the size or complexity of the organization, there may be quite a bit of care and feeding that needs to happen for the board. So I'm just curious about your opinion when it comes to a board liaison and how that might impact that personal side and all those dynamics you were talking about, Marla.
Great question. You know, my first reaction is, if we wanted to create a role, board liaison role, that is almost like project management in its scope, right? Somebody who's going to do some follow-up perhaps and track on things, that kind of a thing. I've seen that, and I think that can be very helpful for efficiency and to move things forward. But I think about, you know, what can we delegate in our roles and what can't we delegate, or just we shouldn't delegate. And I think as an executive director, you can have a board liaison take care of some of the administrative work, terrific. But you can't delegate your own relationship as an executive director to somebody else. You know what I mean? In terms of your own relationship with board members, I would think. So sure, complement your own, or supplement, I should say, your own capacity as an ED to offload some of that work with somebody else, great. But you're still going to have to do these things, I think, in terms of get to know your board. You're the ED. You can't delegate that part, you know? So that would be my reaction.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll say very briefly that I think the administrative support, and I'm using a capital A there, it can be complex and relational administrative work. I'm not, you know, I think that you're right, Vernetta, that it can help people feel supported and create a level of accountability, like, whoa, look at this orientation package I got. This is real stuff. You know, look at, I've got my meetings calendared for the whole year. That's cool. My last board, I never knew when we were meeting. Like those steps, if those need to be or should be delegated to someone, I would argue there's a good chance that that can increase people's sense of being supported and accountable. I think, you know, if you have the capacity, I love that word, if it stretches the capacity of the executive by providing that infrastructure to board service, I think that's amazing. I'm going to ask you to go to board chair because we got a lot to cover. Next slide, please. How does the chair foster engagement?
Okay, so I'll speak quickly. Well, not too quickly.
No.
The questions are there to frame this conversation. And as I look at the questions such as, am I modeling engagement? Do I have the time? Am I comfortable, etc.? I always think about what are the conversations that I want to have with people to help them understand and really embrace these concepts. So I came up with a list. And when thinking about the role of the board chair, I would say it is easy to underestimate the importance of this individual when it comes to setting the tone at the top for engagement. So often you might take a look at the bylaws or the roles and responsibilities, and you see that the board chair calls the meeting to action and, or, runs the meeting. The vice chair steps in if the chair isn't there. And essentially, that's about as much as you see. But if we're thinking about engagement, I think that the chair has the opportunity to not only model behavior, but also cultivate an environment that essentially demands engagement. So, for example, as chair, do I show up prepared? Do I participate in onboarding of new board members, which is an early opportunity to set expectations? Have I created a culture where everyone's contribution is not only encouraged, but expected? Do I ensure meeting agendas create space for active board member participation, not just passive consent? Am I willing to challenge board members who do not appear to be prepared, listening, or engaged? They might be checking emails or doing other things. What is my role in terms of stopping that behavior? Conversely, do I check those who are over engaged and dominating discussions? Do I spread the joy of serving when seeking volunteers? Now, you may wonder, what does that mean? Do I go to the same old chosen few who are always raising their hands? Or am I thinking about how to tap into the talents and skill sets of others who might be too quiet to speak up, or, they're just content. They feel like they're doing their role. So I'm going to be more active and spread the love in that way. Do I follow up with board members who miss a meeting just to check in on them? And I always say there's a human side to governance. I know we all talk about it, but if someone isn't showing up who was especially if they were previously very active, I want to know, something going on, something I can help you with, something we need to talk about. And do I understand that part of my role is to help manage and engage the board, not just when prompted by the ED, but that's my role, because part of my role is really attending to the board. So that's how I would break that down.
Thank you. And I'm going to encourage, I'll do it so you two don't have to. I'll encourage people. Vernetta and Marla did a 2-part series just on being a board chair that's really excellent. And it requires 2 hours actually to really unpack what it looks like to be a board chair that has a meaningful effect during their tenure on the health and growth of an organization. So thank you for lifting that up. I love the idea of spreading the joy. Am I embodying the joy of volunteer leadership? And if I'm not, for a prolonged period of time, if I can't, shouldn't I raise my hand and say, you know what, I can't do this right now. This is a big job, and I can't just tune out for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. If I need help, or I need maybe to transition before my term's up, this is a very impactful role. Even when it does nothing, in so doing, it has a huge impact. So thank you for lifting that up. Next slide, please. And I'm going to stay with you, Vernetta, and talk about another lever in board engagement, arguably maybe the most important in some ways, getting the right people in the room and getting them prepared. So Vernetta, what do you say about recruitment and orientation with respect to board engagement?
Yeah, in addition to everything that's on the slide, so this is the yes and. I want to add to what's on the slides because I know we're sharing those. When I think about recruitment and orientation, I think about setting expectations early before someone is even on the board with respect to recruitment. Don't hold back on what's expected. The type of board that we're trying to be, the vision that we've painted for ourselves and that we're trying to live into in terms of supporting the mission, the work, and the organization. And at orientation, that's another opportunity to emphasize a lot of important messages. I am always surprised. I still encounter a lot of boards or board members who will say, well, it takes at least a year before you understand what's going on and before you're ready to participate in conversations. And I feel like that's a year wasted. We recruit really talented and smart people to serve on boards, or individuals who have ideas. They're already leaders in their community. Why do we think it takes a year before they can make any type of contribution? And so we're setting the wrong expectations on the front end. What we should be doing, especially in orientation, is emphasizing that, hey, we have a healthy culture of inquiry. That means we're inviting your good questions. We want to hear from you. Have someone meet with individuals coming in one-on-one to understand how they think they want to contribute to the organization. Hopefully you have some idea of their skill set and you've had these conversations, but maybe not a real conversation on how that individual sees themselves making a mark on the organization and what the organization can do to engage them, to engage that level of passion. Be honest about the commitment expectations. Don't downplay it by saying, hey, we meet quarterly, read the materials before you show up. Then you're not really asking that person to think about or imagine new ways that they could be helpful and fully engaged as ambassadors for the organization, spokespersons in the community. How are you thinking you can engage them in resource development, et cetera? So big picture, set expectations, have the conversations early on, do one-on-one check-ins with these individuals and bring them into the fold. Don't let them just kind of linger or just hang out there for a year or however long you think it takes to get up to speed.
I love that. I know that we've talked about this, Marla, like this idea that we sell the opportunity to be on our board by how little time it takes. I mean, really, you've got to stop doing that, even in joking fashion. Executives do it all the time. I'm sure I did it. Stop, right? It's not about how little time it takes. It's about how rewarding and meaningful it is, right? And I also love what you said about setting expectations and sharing with people in advance what kind of board is this. That's why that first slide we did together is so important. There isn't one kind of board. What's it going to feel like to be on this board? What do we mean by engagement, right? And the third thing I love about what you said is if you shut it down like that and make it seem so small, just show up and read the minutes. I think use the phrase, no, we encourage you to come up with new ways. That word new, that there's something additive about each member that we actually invite. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, here's how we do this, just do it that way for 3 years and you'll be done. I promise it won't take too long. How interesting is that? Marla, I saw you went off mute. Anything you want to add on the recruitment and orientation?
No, I think that was terrific. I just want to, underscore one thing, Bernetta, that you said around that first year being wasted. That is so true. And I think that that it is harder as a board member to get up to speed, compared to a staff member, for example, on what the organization does. That's true and that's okay. Right. But we can design around that and we can bring people in early and fully into the work through recruitment and orientation and onboarding, as long as we're intentional about that so that people can really jump in running. And there's no reason why we can't do that. It just requires some intention.
Yeah. Not only that, but just one additional footnote to that. When we set that expectation that, we're really not expecting you to make a contribution for a full year. So, sit back, get to know everyone. When you come in, you have a new, fresh perspective on an organization. And even as they're going through the business and the routine of, board business, you probably have some questions. You might be picking up on something that, hey, I wonder if they thought about this, if anyone asked this question. And if there's an expectation that I'm going to be quiet and listen, the organization might be missing out. By the time you are fully indoctrinated, now you've bought into the history and tradition and habit of the way that they're doing things instead of innovating.
Yeah.
Thank you both. It's a huge point. There's so many sort of tropes that get reinforced about board service they're not just jokes tropes, they're harmful. And they set people's expectations about what board service is. Okay, next slide, Marla, can you pick up with another lever, which I think is critical, which is how do we design our meetings? What's in them and how do they, what are their forms to engage board members?
The first thing I want to say about this is that the word design says so much, right? When we are designing meetings, not just having a meeting or going to a meeting, right? That we really need to think about that word literally. Okay, I'm designing this experience. and what's it for, you know? And so when I'm thinking about frequency and length, what's the activities on the agenda, you know, all of the things that we're going to do, I really want to sit back and think, okay, when I'm creating this agenda, I'm designing for a set of outcomes and objectives, right? And engagement is a huge part of that. What is an engaging meeting going to mean? And there's so much writing on meetings, because if you think about board time, much of it is spent in meetings, you know? So a good meeting or a bad meeting, you know, it's going to make or break engagement among a lot of other things. So it's a huge factor for engagement, I feel. You know, am I looking forward to this, like we were joking about earlier, or am I dreading the meeting, you know? So go back to the notion of design. When I'm creating an agenda for a board, I start with the objectives. I don't just get into the activities. I'm always shocked how many board meeting agendas I see, and I see so many in the work that I do, and look at the agenda, and there's no objectives. And it's just a list of things that drive me nuts sometimes, like old business, new business. Can we just agree right now? Everybody on this call right now, can we all agree never to do that again? Never write old business and new business on an agenda. And never just write like report. What about it? Who cares? You know, like we really need to think about what is this experience meant to do when we leave this meeting? What do we want? Here's the thing I often do when I design agendas is I start with the objectives and I think, okay, at the end of this meeting, what will everybody in the room, board members, staff who are there, what have you, what will we know that we didn't know when we walked in the room, but we'll know when we walk out of the room? So what will we know? How will we feel at the end of this meeting, right? So we're gonna have to design to that, whether that's icebreakers or sometimes people call them mission moments where, you know, they have some kind of, you know, experiential part of the day, or a learning, as we see here in the slide, a, you know, mission-focused education, you know, I'm going to learn something or what have you, something inspiring or whatever it might be. So what will I know walking out? How will I feel walking out? And what will we have done? So do, know, feel, and do. What will we do in the meeting? What work will we get accomplished? So if I can use the know, feel, and do as sort of that easy to remember trick, when I write my agendas, then I can design the activities and the conversation and who's going to facilitate what and all of that kind of thing accordingly. And hopefully I'm going to get a lot closer to full engagement than I would have if I just copy and paste last month's agenda and just change the date at the top, you know, which is just, you know, unacceptable, really. You know, we need to put the time in. So there's the design of the format, which matters. Who's talking? How many people are talking? Are we including as many voices as possible? You know, are we, you know, encouraging all kinds of questions, et cetera? Bernetta, you spoke to this, et cetera. So there's the format and then there's the content itself. Are we really making sure that we're on the right topics? So content here. Are we talking about the most important thing this organization is facing right now? And the board's part of that, you know, there's the organization's, you know, what they're focused on right now. And then where's the board's part in that? And what do they need to be thinking about from a governance and a leadership and a strategic perspective? What are some unanswered questions that we need to grapple with, whether it's what's going on in our environment right now or what have you? And I spoke about education. And this last piece I think is really important. Distinguish between discussion and decision making. So often we get tripped up in conversations where we're not clear about what we're doing. What are we talking about right now? Are we deciding something? Are we learning about something so it's more generative? Are we providing input to whom? The ED, another staff member, to a committee or what have you? So we really need to be careful and thoughtful around facilitation so that we facilitate using questions when they're appropriate on the agenda, and talking about what does done look like. If done looks like a decision, let's say so. Or does done look like not a decision, but in fact, it's just going to be learning more about or sense making, or even just we don't even know yet. You know, I mean, we can be open-ended about certain things. Or does done look like input to somebody, like I said before. So the design, actually, that word, again, is really full. And if we take a design approach to it, and we think about format and content, and that trick I mentioned around objectives, know, feel, and do, I think we're going to get a lot further to engagement than perhaps if we don't do those things.
Fantastic guidance. Vernetta, I know you want to get in there too.
Just one comment. I love the know, feel, and do, and that framing. And one other thing that I just wanted to add, I tell people, if you can write your minutes before you've had the meeting, you probably don't have a good agenda. And there's, you've never heard that?
So
I know
true.
organizations that,
So true.
they have the minutes ready to go. It's like, okay, let's just fill it in. Who didn't show up?
Right.
And it's like, yeah, that's probably not a good meeting. So that's another way to kind of just check yourself in terms of, are you creating opportunities for engagement or are you not?
Yeah, and I mean, if this slide, this is a good chance, there's construction going on in my building, of course, because I'm doing a webinar. There's, this slide, I think, is a good temperature check. If it's making you uncomfortable, if you're an executive director or a board chair and it's making you uncomfortable, I think we want to go back to that slide about, do I really want an engaged board of directors? And the answer might be no, I don't have time for it right now, or I don't have the right people. I have to go back and rebuild the whole thing. There may be very good reasons why you don't and why this is too much. But the reality is, when you have the right people in the room, this is what it takes to get a group of adults to do something meaningful. It takes thought, it takes preparation, it takes engagement, it takes willingness to go into the unknown, it takes clarity about design and content. It simply does. That's how you get the most out of people. So I think this slide really is a good sort of barometer of, is this what I want to be doing? Do I want to engage board of directors? And as Marla said, we hope you do, and you can figure out how to align it and get there in concert with where your organization is going. That's how it's not going to feel like homework, but like something that is, coming of age with the organization. What's next for your board? And having great meetings is central to it. Let's stay on board activities, Marla, and just briefly on this next slide, if you could speak a little to this old adage that, board members are as good as what they do between meetings.
Yes.
What am I supposed to be doing between meetings, and who's fostering that?
Right. Because so much of the time, again, when we think about where are the moments for engagement, there's the meetings themselves, and Vernetta, you spoke about, of course, recruitment and coming into the board. These moments we have to really pay attention to. And so another huge moment is time between meetings, and especially for those on the call who only meet quarterly. That's a lot of time between board meetings where people can get lost and disengaged if there's not enough touch points. So I want us all to think about that space between formal moments. What are we doing to make sure that folks stay engaged and are able to contribute? And committee work is a huge part of that. Committee work is one of those things. So do we have clear charters for and support to the committees? This is where, Vernetta, I would, your point earlier about liaisons to the boards and the scaffolding and the kind of the structure that we need to put around board work is super important. If committees aren't supported and clear on what they're doing, that can be such a missed opportunity for engagement. And, when somebody is recruited onto a committee, hopefully it's because they're like, oh, good, this is the committee that speaks to more perhaps than some of the other parts of the organization, really the place I want to contribute. Like, I'm really excited to be on that committee. I'm excited to be on the board and I love the organization, but this committee is how I really get to tap in, And so we've got to be really thoughtful about matching people up to those opportunities, and committees are such a huge part. And I'm using committees somewhat broadly. There's the committees, there's also the project-based task forces that come up when something comes up and then they disband when that chunk of work is over. And the role of staff, including and beyond the ED. This is an opportunity for board members to get engaged with the people who work at the organization. And those relationships can get fostered and strengthened through work between meetings in a very important way. And certainly accountability, I think, is helpful to think about between meetings, because when we say we're going to do something, if we're going to wait 4 months before another meeting to say, oh, hey, did you follow up on those things that you said? We can't do that. It's like, oh my goodness, we only meet 4 times a year. Or even if it's every month, it's still only 12 times a year that there's a touch point for maybe 1 hour. So we've got to have a kind of a system and a culture of accountability. And I agree with you, Vernetta, it starts from day one, or even pre-day one, when we have conversations about it and all the modeling that happens, et cetera. And, lastly on this slide, I would say, and I've been speaking about relationships a lot on this conversation so far, and this is another huge point. When we are in relationship, It's not we don't have to be reminded to do things for the organization. When we are in full engagement and in relationship with the people on the board and the people on staff, this should be front of mind for me. I can't wait to do the thing I said I was going to do if I am fully engaged. You didn't have to remind me because I was the one that raised my hand anyway and said, I want to do that, or this is why I'm here. This is why I'm here. And as a board member, I've got to get in touch with, and I've been that board member in the past. And I, had to kind of check in with myself, like, I feel myself not being as engaged. I feel myself going, oh shoot, I just said I was going to do something, and I know in the back of my head, I don't want to do that. So we've got to answer those questions for ourselves and get very real with ourselves. And if I'm not in relationship with the people on that board, it's going to get in the way, and my accountability is going to go down from there, et cetera, et cetera. So if we can focus on building relationships between meetings, through committees, through just conversations, through social events, checking in with one another, it's going to go so far.
Yeah. And this slide also gets, does it not, to how much time a board chair, an ED, is really willing to put in, because to know that the work is happening between meetings takes support, right?
That's right.
And certainly committee chairs as well. So there's a number of people that, simply would have to have the time. And I know, Marla, you have said that there are people who love organizations. They don't have time to be a board chair. They have time to be a board member, but not a board chair. Or they have time to be a board member, but not a committee chair, right? If we want work between meetings, that's real work. I love your example of get back to the next meeting and say, oops, I didn't do it. We just lost a month or 3 months. We need people with time. Next slide. I know we have a number of questions and we have about 8 minutes left. So just knowing that, and a number of our questions are about assessment, Vernetta. So I'm going to let you speak to that and just tell us a little bit about what you think the role of assessment is and how we can use it or other means to take action to get our board back on track.
I love a good board self-assessment. In fact, for a number of my consulting engagements, I start with that so that I can have some data on how the board perceives its own performance, data that shows me where there's some opportunities to elevate performance, and data to, really move a board along. So an assessment is an opportunity to be reflective. Sometimes it's an opportunity to hear those hard truths that, hey, we're not as good as we think we are. We're not fully engaged. We're not carrying out our commitments, our roles, our responsibilities, our fiduciary duties, etc. But this is what I say about an assessment. It is not a report card. An assessment is a tool, like many other tools that are listed on this slide, that you can leverage for deeper board engagement. So an assessment might help a board understand, in the first instance, what its roles and responsibilities are. And then once they see that, how are they performing? That's the assessment. But we have some other levers on here that I'm going to point to. I talked about the role of the board chair. And in this overview for action, I want the board chair to really focus on their role in developing the team as a whole, paying attention to culture, group dynamics, and developing shared expectations. Knowing when to call it, coaching members off the board. And I think that also goes along with the next bullet of honorable exits and getting back to the human side of governance. Sometimes people come in committed and you notice that the level of engagement it drops off. Think about it for a minute. Something might be going on. So really take the opportunity to have the conversations. But I skipped over my first bullet of the governance committee. As much as I love assessments, I love a governance committee because a governance committee can do so much of the heavy lifting when it comes to the board. Yes, there are roles, plenty of roles and opportunities to be shared and spread around, but that goes to committee governance that should be paying attention to the needs of the board, how the board is functioning, and the individuals on the board taking the time, making sure that someone, if it's the board chair, someone from the governance committee or governance committee and ED, doing those individual check-ins with the individuals on the board on an annual basis, at least, is really important. Survey the board to take the temperature for how things are going and do it on a regular basis. And last but not least, the bylaws. Couple of things I want to say about bylaws. Sometimes bylaws save us by having timed exit point for individuals, and maybe someone, when their performance starts waning, they may be near the end of the term, and that's a graceful way out. When I draft bylaws or am reviewing them, I want to see, is there a provision to remove board members with or without cause? And people say, why would we have it without cause? I said, because people are litigious, and there may be individuals who are really damaging or poisoning the rest of the board. Um, they are just disrupting everything, and they need to go. They're engaged in an unhealthy way, and we don't want to have to litigate it. And also, with respect to the bylaws, you may have a provision that says something to the extent of, if individuals aren't showing up for a certain number of meetings or really are not fulfilling their role, then a conversation will be had, or they could be removed automatically. So these are all levers to make sure that we're not left kind of wringing our hands, figuring out, what do we do, especially if our concern is over one or two individuals. But looking at all the tools that you have is really quite a few. And one other thing I wanted to say, I take notes every time you talk, Marla, because you're just, giving us all this knowledge and wisdom. As you were talking, I know at some point we were talking about the ED, and this is a check that I use for EDs. I like to ask, what percentage of your time are you investing in the board? And for some EDs, that catches them completely off guard. They wonder if there's a right answer to that. And the short answer is no, there's not. But I want you to think about it. How are you investing in their performance, their engagement, their experience? And what does that look like? So that's it for me.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We're just about at time, so I'm going to ask you to scroll ahead a couple slides to the teaser for the next Advancing Practice webinar, which is coming up in June with a great practitioner, Maisha Forbes, talking about a new approach to managing leadership transition, which is really exciting and in some ways a good follow-up on this conversation. It's all about more thoughtful leadership cultivation throughout your organization. With Maisha, we'll talk about staff and executive level positions. Today we've been talking about boards. I love that last question, Bernetta. I think it's a good one to end on. How much time are you putting into your board? A lot of times we say, why isn't the board invested in the organization? Why do I have to pull teeth? And it's like, well, how much time are you putting in, right? There is such a reciprocity and mutuality that is complex, admittedly, to staffs and boards working together. But I think the two of you have provided so many excellent levers for change and engagement today. Next slide, please. A reminder that a very brief evaluation is going to pop up now, and that you're going to receive the recording and the slides from this webinar from NPQ in a few days. And I hope to see you in June to talk more about executive succession and transition. Thanks to you both.